one moment in life that you would live over and over again. It is that moment that I want to share with you. A moment which starts in a place called Key West, Florida, with a man named Finbar Gittelman and a ship named Wolf.
Sea's full of surprises. It's great and vast and beautiful and scary sometimes. It'll put you to the challenge. You think you've seen it all, and then wham, there's something you never imagined would happen. The most difficult thing is when things get really dangerous, which they can. And I've been very, very lucky. I've been very lucky over the years. I've never lost a crewman. Never. I did lose a ship. I think the most difficult thing that I have to live with is when I lost that ship, to give the order to abandon ship. That's probably the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life. She's full of surprises, and she is a hard mistress sometimes, but she's also a wonderful lover.
My name is Matt Dean. Several years ago, I lost everything that I thought I cared about and found myself in Florida attempting to restart my life. I had chased the American dream of having a family and a house and a steady job, only to have it completely turned upside down. In an agonizing 6-month period of time, I'd lost my marriage, my job, and the small business that I'd started. In desperation, I sold everything that I had and moved to Orlando, Florida, looking for freelance work. It was around this time that I was introduced to someone for whom I would grow to greatly respect. Someone who opened up a whole new world to me.
I am Finbar Gittelman. I am 3/4 of a century old, and I am an admiral, Conch Republic Navy. I'm Supreme Commander of Conch Republic Military Forces and First Sea Lord. Most folks go through a period during their childhood and their adolescence where they have to, I guess the expression is, find yourself. And I never had to go through that because I sort of was always aware of what I am. When I was going to grade school and the boys would play hooky and they'd all go to the park to play ball, I wouldn't do that. I'd go to the water. I'd go down to the docks, and I'd sit there and talk to the old guys hanging out on the docks, and then I'd find things that would float, anything, boards, logs, whatever, find a piece of line, tie them together, make a raft, go paddling around. And that was it. I was always aware that I was a sailor. I didn't know much of anything about being a sailor, but I knew that's what I was. And I knew I belonged on the water since my earliest recollections. When we set the sail, I'll give the orders. Slack clew lines, you let them run free, and then somebody's going to get on the halyard, which is the first one on this pin, okay, and heave it up as high as it'll go. I feel much more able and capable when I'm at sea than I do when I go ashore, because when I go ashore, all kinds of things I run into that I don't necessarily understand, and it's hard to deal with. At sea, I don't have that. Sometimes it's hard to deal with, but never it's anything I don't understand. Out there, I understand all of it.
Hey, Matt. How you doing, sir?
You sleep good?
I did.
Good.
I had been in Fort Myers for around a year when a friend named John Buffar introduced me to Finbar, Julie, and Wolf, who had been hired to work a local pirate festival.
Fire! Okay, all heads was on the port tack.
Though I'd never been on board a ship and never had a strong draw to the ocean, the moment my foot touched the deck of Wolf, all of that changed. It was like a wave washed over me and separated everything I was before Wolf from everything I was after Wolf.
Hey, welcome aboard, folks. I am Finbar the Terrible of Cayo. Going out today to do a little hell raising.
I found myself falling in love with a world that I had never known existed. New ways of living opened up in front of me, like a sail on a ship that had been waiting for the wind. Suddenly, the rough seas of my own life didn't seem to matter anymore. Hard times were a way of life for a sailor, and that was okay. You took the good with the bad and you sailed through to the next port. I sailed on Wolf every chance I had, but it soon came time to move to California and further pursue my film career. Days turned into years as I struggled to build a business. All the while, I longed to return to Wolf. In 2015, I get an excited call from Julie. After years of waiting, they were finally going to get the chance to sail to Cuba. Wolf had sailed for decades around the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, and up and down the eastern seaboard. But Cuba had been highly restricted. With relations mending between the Obama administration and the Cuban government, a small window was opening. Julie then told me that this was the first time Finbar would be traveling back to Havana in over 50 years.
Some of my earliest memories are in Cuba. And things were very, very different then. I used to go there with my family. I had some Cuban family. And back in those days, we used to go there. They used to come here. We used to run back and forth and whatever. And I have a lot of very fond childhood memories in Cuba.
Finbar had grown up in both Miami and Havana while traveling back and forth with his father.
Of course, back in those days, you could go back and forth freely. And I sometimes tell people the story how we used to drive to Cuba, and they didn't believe me. But we did. We used to drive from Miami down to Key West, get on the ferry with the car, and drive off in Havana.
When Castro took over in 1959, Finbar's family fled the country after being forced to turn over everything they had to the government. For them, the revolution left a painful mark.
When I think about Cuba, I can't help but relate it to what my own experiences and the experiences of my family. I have some Cuban family, and they did not fare very well after the revolution.
Finbar would not be back to Havana again, but was drawn back into Cuban waters in the 1980s.
I was there during the Mariel Boat Lift. I took part in that, and that was a very emotional thing. A very emotional thing.
Finbar's stories of his time in Cuba were something I'd been wanting to film for years, so I jumped at the chance to document the trip. Meanwhile, Julie began gathering a crew to help prepare Wolf.
Some guys are cursed with a really expensive wife. I'm lucky, I don't have that. My wife's not all that expensive. But my mistress is.
The ship needed a lot of work to be ready to sail, but people were happy to help. Wolf has a way of gathering amazing people around her, and sailing to Cuba was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
We're very lucky in that we have so many good friends. We have a lot of wonderful people that hang out with us, and so we're always happy to have them on board. Each and every one of them leaves a little piece of their spirit aboard. Most people think of a ship as an inanimate thing, and it's not. A ship has a spirit, and it's the spirit of the people who built her, the spirit of the people who sailed on her. And a ship acquires a spirit over the years and becomes a spiritual being, just like a person is. Wolf was my father's name, so it's named after him. And he wasn't a sailor, but he was a wolf. The other thing is that the wolf is my spirit animal. I was one of the guys that actually built her, so I literally have my blood and sweat in her. She's home. We sometimes live ashore temporarily from time to time, but this is real home. Yeah.
The ship is nearly ready when we get word that the visas have been approved, and we would soon be underway. Julie had arranged for us to be part of a goodwill race that had secured permits to sail from Key West to the resort town of Varadero and then on to Havana. Because of the confrontational relationship the U.S. had with Cuba since the 1960s, Cuba seemed very mysterious to me. I was interested in finding out more about the people and the living conditions, as well as explore the culture and the history. There were, of course, hundreds of places we wanted to see, but because we'd be there for a very short time, we'd have to limit our visits to a few key places: the old Spanish section of Havana, the Hemingway House, Mariel, and most important of all, the Hotel Nacional where Finbar had spent much of his youth.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time there when I was a kid, and I had very, very fond memories of it.
The crew finished loading Wolf with supplies while we watched the wind pick up speed. Sailing requires the right amount of wind. Too much wind makes for a rough and sometimes dangerous trip. Not enough, and it can take you days to travel a very small distance. With the last of the supplies loaded, we are finally ready to sail for Cuba.
Stand by to get underway. Take in the springs. Take in the bow. Everything clear? All right, take in the stern.
We motor out from Wolf's home base in Safe Harbor as the weather takes a turn for the worse. The weather forecast had been for short bursts of rain, but was now turning into a small storm. We had one stop to make to fill up on fuel for Wolf's large diesel engine, but as we made our way to the fueling station, our plans for sailing to Cuba that evening started to fade.
Sometimes you get caught in real hard weather, dangerous weather, because you have no choice. Mainly in situations where you're out there and the weather goes bad on you unexpectedly. And there you are, so you deal with it. I mean, you just deal with it like anything else in life that you're faced with all of a sudden. So the choices are to anchor out overnight or go back to Safe Harbor. And I think I've just decided to go back to Safe Harbor.
That's one less day in Cuba.
Finbar's past experience had made him cautious when bad weather was in the forecast.
The most difficult thing is when things get really dangerous, which they can. It's a whole long story how we got caught in the hurricane, but we were between Cuba and Jamaica, and the hurricane was forecast to go well south of Jamaica. We wouldn't have even felt it. Hurricane Allen, 1980, Category 5. It took several erratic turns and it lined right up on us like a bullseye and it ran us right over. We were in a good ship. We had a great crew, but the forces of nature can literally beat you to death, and it can take your ship. And it took ours, and we fought a hell of a fight to keep her together and to keep her afloat. And when I knew we were losing the fight, I had to order abandoned ship. We got in a life raft. And when we were in the raft, we watched her go down. We saw the masthead light disappear under the waves, and it's one of those things, that little things in my mind that haunts me, is the sight. The masthead light was still burning when she went under. I'm going to say it was around 20 minutes before the eye actually hit us. And we went through the eye of the hurricane and out the other side in the raft. And that was a hell of a ride. We ended up spending 4 days in the raft. We were eventually picked up by a Norwegian tanker. We were one of 6 vessels sunk that night. There were a total of 55 people lost at sea that night. And there were no survivors from any of the other vessels. There were 5 other vessels sunk, no survivors. We were the only crew that actually survived. Yeah.
Anxiously, we waited to see what the morning will bring. Mornings on the ship gave me time to reflect. Until the collapse of my personal and professional life, I thought I knew who I was and what I wanted. When everything fell down around me, I was left searching for purpose. Being around Wolf gave me a different way of looking at life. It was no longer a purpose that mattered as much as just living each moment to the fullest. Joy and disappointment were just different sides of the same coin. Living life on the deck of a ship made you be completely aware of the present.
Hi, Charlie. Hi, Captain. Hey. All right, clear stuff. Oh, yeah, I'm coming.
Are all hands aboard?
The morning clouds lift. The weather is clear. We were finally on our way.
Everybody make sail. Ready?
Ready on the plate? Ready.
Right, all the way.
Oh, we'd be all right if the wind were in our sails. We'd be all right.
What's your back doing
We'd be
now?
all right if the wind were in our sails, and we'll all hang on behind. And we'll roll the old chariot along. We'll roll the old chariot along. We'll roll the old chariot along, and we'll all hang on behind. Oh, a night on the town wouldn't do us any harm.
A night on the town wouldn't do us any harm. A night on the town wouldn't do us any harm. And we'll all hang on behind.
And we'll roll the old chariot along.
We'll roll the old chariot along. We'll roll the old chariot along. And we'll all hang on behind.
Oh, another shot of rum wouldn't do us any harm.
Another shot of rum wouldn't do us any harm. Another shot of rum wouldn't do us any harm. And we'll all hang on behind.
And we'll roll the old chariot along.
We'll roll the old chariot along. We'll roll the old chariot along. And we'll all hang on behind.
Okay, guys, who wants to drive? Whoever sails with me must tell me they understand and agree to my version of how a ship needs to run. The 10 Commandments are as follows. I am the Lord thy captain. There be no higher authority aboard this ship. Thou shalt not disobey my order. Thou shalt not tell me a lie. Thou shalt never lose thy cool. Thou shalt not take any strong drink or any strong drugs other than with my permission. Thou shalt not sleep on watch. Thou shalt not waste water. Thou shalt not hassle thy shipmate. Thou shalt not piss to windward, and thou shalt not bitch. So be it. Probably the single most important of those commandments is the 4th commandment, thou shalt not lose thy cool. There are situations out there when it gets very scary. When you get scared, it's very, very important not to put your fear on your shipmates. Because if anybody loses their cool and becomes hysterical with fear, it's a terrible danger to themselves and to their shipmates. When you get scared, you take your fear and you put it in your pocket, and you get on with what you got to do. The sea and the winds and the waves, those are elemental forces. And being a sailor, being a real sailor, is living with those forces day in and day out and being tuned to them. That's one of the things it takes to make a great sailor.
One of the most amazing experiences on the sea is looking up at the clear night sky and seeing the ocean of stars above you. This, however, is difficult to film on a boat. Filming starlight on land is as easy as putting your camera on a tripod and setting a long exposure. However, when sailing on the ocean, a long exposure will only give you streaks of lights and blurs due to the movement of the ship. Determined to share the stars with you as best I could, I had to find a camera sensitive enough to record starlight in real time. Fortunately, recent advancements in technology gave me a chance to capture these elusive dots of light.
Okay, now, who's on the watch?
Depending on the number of crew members on board, each watch is crewed by 2 or 3 people in 4 to 6 hour shifts. At night, the main duty is to keep a steady watch on the horizon for other ships. We are now in the Florida Straits, a shipping channel where freighters, cruise ships, and fishing vessels are numerous and not always easy to see. Our eyes adjust to the extremely low light as we watch for the telltale green and red lights. Every ship is required to operate with green and red lights so that other ships can tell which direction they're going. If you're facing toward the front or bow of your ship, the green light is on the right or starboard side, and the red light is on the left or port side of the ship. The white light at the top of the mast told other ships that we were using our engine and not just the sails. The wind is minimal tonight, and the current of the Gulf Stream is working against us. Though we'd prefer to make our way under sail alone, Wolf's large diesel engine was needed to maintain a reasonable speed.
There are some of us that are still very much into the old traditions and doing things the old way. I mean, for example, now you have all this super high-tech navigation gear, all these navigation systems and GPS and all this. Well, that's all well and good, and I use it, but if that stuff breaks, I'm not lost. I still practice the old ways, and I can still get wherever I'm going. One time we were South America, bound for the coast of Colombia, and we went through the Windward Passage, and about that time every piece of navigation gear on the vessel was down, and the sky was completely overcast. You couldn't see the sun to take a sun sight. So we were restricted to what you call dead reckoning, which is considered to be a primitive form of navigation. Well, when we reached our destination, I was less than 5 miles off, using nothing but dead reckoning. So, you know, the old ways, they still work. And in some sense, they work better because there's nothing to break.
To be within 15 miles of your destination using dead reckoning is considered highly accurate. 5 miles is masterful. To use dead reckoning, a sailor starts with a known position and then calculates where they are by using the ship's speed, a watch, and a compass. We didn't need that method tonight, but when we entered the waters around Cuba in the morning, we would no longer have GPS service and would have to rely on our compass and the charts. At our current rate, it looks like we'll see landfall by morning.
Running down to Cuba, we are bound away.
Wavy boys to Cuba,
To Cuba's coast at the breaking of day.
running down to Cuba. Wavy boys to Cuba, running down to Cuba.
What's off in the distance?
Cuba, Cuba. We're see you me. Land ho.
Land ho. A welcome sound no matter how long you're at sea. Small mounds appear in the distance, and we are finally getting our first glimpse of Cuba. Finbar stands watch, looking for signs of the approaching channel. It takes careful eyes to find the markers through which we will have to navigate to get to our first destination, the Marina in Varadero.
As a melon and sweet as a mango.
Running down to Cuba. Wavy boys to Cuba, running down to Cuba.
I'm not going to start claiming that I have all this knowledge that nobody else does, because it's not so. I'm just a regular old sailor. But I have a lot of years doing it. What I have learned, I very much like to pass on to my shipmates. Whenever I take a new crewman aboard, I say, well, someday you're going to meet some guy who is so smart and he's got so much experience and so much knowledge that he knows all that there is to know about seamanship. And when you meet that guy, don't even get on a boat with him because he's a dangerous fool. If you've learned so much that you don't need to learn anymore, then you don't know anything. You must be humble before the sea, and you must keep on learning. Hell, I learned things from some of my newest crew. I mean, everybody's got something I can learn from.
As we enter the channel, we raise our flags to signal where we are from and where we are going.
Oh, I'm leaving from Key West, a land that I love to spend a long night on the sea. I'm bound for Havana to see an old flame where she'll have some loving for me. So come fill up your glass, buy a drink what you please.
Okay, strike pencils.
Damage I'll pay. So easy and free when you're drinking with me. I'm a man you don't meet every day. I have a tall ship, I have men I command. I've lived my whole life on the...
We follow the guide boat through the rocky outcroppings called Breakwater and enter the interior of the Marina at Varadero. We are anxious but hopeful that we will get through customs without incident. I'm slightly concerned that the camera equipment I brought to document this trip may cause problems, and Wolf, being a pirate ship, has a cannon on board, which suddenly seems like a bad idea.
Make fast.
After a few tries to get the rope secure, we are safely docked in Varadero. Now, we'll hand over our passports and wait.
Everybody's passport.
Concerned that the government officials wouldn't want to be filmed, I put down my camera and had to use my phone as an alternative.
How many pesos do you have on board?
How many persons? 12.
12.
We started to try and put together a trip last December, and it was just going through an awful lot of hoops. You had to work with the State Department, with the Commerce Department, get this permission and that permission. And now they've opened it up to anybody that wants to come and do a people-to-people exchange. But we tried last year, and everything was still a lot of hoops to jump through. And all of a sudden, July, everything was opening up. September, it opened up more. And now you write a Coast Guard application and wait for 3 weeks, and you get approved, and you can go.
The customs agents were thorough, questioning us about everything we were bringing into the country. They asked about the cameras, but seemed convinced that they were just for tourism, and they didn't seem bothered by the cannon, since it was staying on the ship.
Looks easy enough.
The crew set off to where they'd spend the night, while Julie and Finbar stayed on the ship. Since we would be here for less than 24 hours, they chose to remain aboard and save their energy for the continuing sail to Havana. I made the half-mile walk to my hotel and found the streets surprisingly empty. I had anticipated seeing more of the Cuban culture, only to find that Varadero is a resort town not unlike other resort towns in other tropical destinations. Arriving at the hotel, I found a number of my fellow sailors waiting at the bar. It turns out that the resort gave their guests all the free Havana Club rum they could drink, and I soon found out why it was envied around the world. Havana Club rum quickly became a favorite of mine, and I would find ways to lighten the weight of my suitcase so I could bring home as many bottles as I could carry. Whether on land or on sea, I find the water soothing. The beaches in Varadero were even more so. Compared to the crowded slips of sand in Los Angeles, this was amazingly peaceful. Though my time in Varadero was limited, I could not help but sit and watch the waves. The resort was beautiful as well, but it was like so many other resorts in so many other places that I spent little time there and found myself anxious to get back to the ship.
Little, but
Thank you.
yeah, you bet. Thank you for bringing me to Cuba.
With a nudge from the same two boatmen who helped us dock, we headed out of the marina and back into open waters. Next stop, Havana.
How you doing? I've been all over the U.S. East Coast and the Gulf, Bahamas, all over the Caribbean, South America, both East and West Coasts. I've been across the Pacific a couple of times. What I love most about it are those moments when everything is as it should be, a fair wind and relatively calm seas, and you're going somewhere and you're out there under sail, everything's trimmed up just right, and you sit back and you look around you and you see the wonderment of it.
Everybody make sail! Hands to the main! All the way!
It's my home. It's where I live, it's where I travel, it's what I do. Just the people, the beauty of it, the way of life suits me perfectly. It runs at the right speed. Of course, I enjoy the company of my fellow sailors, because that's a world that we share. You know, the work, the adventures, the satisfaction of being what I am. Just the satisfaction of it. That's the best thing.
We follow the coastline through the night, never losing sight of a string of lights that are just a few miles away. Finally, after months of planning, Havana is in view.
Te voy a dar
For a man who isn't given to emotional displays, there's no hiding the excitement of seeing Havana for the first time in 50 years. Approaching a city from the ocean is a marvelous sight. Everything along the waterfront is laid bare, and the skyline seems to go for miles. What a relief this would have been for sailors who had spent months at sea chasing the currents in the Atlantic Ocean.
Son tus caricias las que me invitan a la pasión. Te voy a dar guajira, te voy a dar guajira, mi amor. Guajira de mi vida, yo te voy a dar mi vida entera.
Buenos días, señor. Schooner Wolf, inbound.
Construiremos el futuro los dos. Para siempre nuestra llama estará encendida, mi amor. Te voy a dar guajira. Te voy a dar guajira. Te voy a dar mi vida entera, guajira linda. Te voy a dar mi corazón, te voy a dar mi pasión, te voy a dar.
The Marina Hemingway is a mix of well-kept buildings with a fresh coat of paint and ruins of buildings that look untouched since the Revolution. We would soon find out that much of Cuba is the same.
Take up on the after spring.
Welcome to Marina Hemingway. My
Gracias,
name is
señor.
Gabriel, the dock master. I have 10 minutes of work with this boat, and from 15 minutes I will be here with you.
Okay.
May I come?
Very good.
Thank you.
The approval for us to leave would come from the dockmaster. And then, with no fanfare, we have arrived. Overnight, we stayed in a casa particular, which is a private home that residents have turned into a hotel, much like Airbnb. We hail a taxi to drive us to our first destination, the historic Spanish section of Havana. Our taxi driver turns out to be famous Cuban actor Jose Antonio Espinosa, who is using his private car to make a little extra money. It seems the Cubans have been well ahead of the U.S. in the going trend of private taxi service, but without the need of an app for your phone. Phone service is a little spotty in Cuba, but all Jose needed was a sign on the front of his car, and he was in business. We turn onto the famous Malecón, a stretch of road that follows the shoreline along Havana. Finbar nods to the right, and I get my first glimpse of the location of his famous Cuba stories, the Hotel Nacional.
La dulzura de la caña y el aroma del café, el olor de la campiña y el dulce sabor del ron. Corazón, te traigo pa' que bailes.
We'll start our tour near the former capital and work our way along to the harbor, where we'll find the oldest buildings in Havana. Our small group stands out as obvious tourists amongst the Cuban nationals. We're followed by polite glances and a few smiles as we navigate the debris-filled streets.
Guajira,
Before coming, I read a few books on the history of Cuba and tried to learn a little Spanish so as not to seem indifferent. However, books cannot take the place of being there in person. Being in a place has a way of washing away any preconceived notions of that place and of the people living there. It wasn't hard to imagine young Finbar walking the streets in Havana. Not much has changed since the 1950s. The cars were the most obvious, and as we were surrounded by Spanish buildings built in the 1700s and 1800s, it was as though we'd stepped into a time capsule that covered hundreds of years of history. Cuba has gone through a number of revolutions since it was first occupied by the Spanish. But it was the latest revolution that was forefront on Finbar's mind. The era since Castro's revolution in 1959 has been difficult for Cuba. Relations with the U.S. had been pushed to the brink of war, and Castro's view on ruling the island had been polarizing to some Cubans. For decades, Cuba was supported by the Soviet Union, but when it collapsed, Cuba was once again on its own. After years of animosity, a hope of a new future was rising as relations between the U.S. and Cuba warmed. Finbar's feelings were also warming as childhood memories flooded back.
Just like you remember? Is it? This is.
Of course there's feelings, because I spent a lot of time in Cuba when I was a boy. I have a lot of very fond childhood memories, very fond.
For the rest of us, each street was a new discovery. Beautiful theaters, 400-year-old forts, crumbling ruins. Havana is a fascinating city of contrasts. I reached the Malecón once again as the workday ended and people began to gather by the water. Across the entry to the harbor, the Morro Castle guards the city. Hundreds of years ago, pirates would fight the Spanish for the gold that they were taking from the Americas. Had Finbar been alive during those times, I have no doubt that he too would have been out on those waters, musket and sword in hand. After walking much of the city, the gang rested for a bit before celebrating our arrival at the Hotel Nacional.
Like 14 years old, I was here with my old man. He went away with cousin Jose to take care of some business, whatever. I used to come here a lot with my father. Sometimes we would check into a hotel and the old man would go off with cousin Jose for a day or two. My father, he was a real live and let live kind of guy. He didn't have a lot of don't do this and don't do that. But he did have one that he was very strict about. He was a teetotaler. He was absolutely against drinking alcohol. He didn't drink a drop himself, and he wasn't about to let me drink a drop. So the one strict rule that I had was no booze. Well, here I am, I'm 14 years old, and I'm in this hotel, and the old man had told the hotel manager, he said, give the kid anything he wants, but no booze. Well, Naturally, 14-year-olds, they want certain things that are forbidden. And I wanted a bottle of rum. So I hatched a plan. In those days in Cuba, every good hotel had at least 2 bars. One of them was where the ladies of the night would hang out. I said, well, here's my plan. I'm going to go in there, I'm going to hook up with one of these girls. I'll get her to get me a bottle of rum. So I walk into the bar and I look around. There's a bunch of ladies, all very well dressed and really pretty. Most of them look like they've been around the block maybe one more time than usual. There was this one very young, very innocent, gorgeous looking young gal, kind of sitting by herself. So I walk over and I introduce myself, and we're making small talk, and we get to talk. I said, can I get you a drink? Oh, sure. So I go over to the bartender. I said, let me have a glass of wine. And the bartender says, well, kid, you know I can't serve you. I said, no, it's not for me, it's for Maria. Okay. So they give me a glass of wine and I give it to her, and I'm sitting there drinking a Coke. And we're talking back and forth, and then I mustered up my courage. I said, here's $10. Go get me a bottle of rum and get a bottle of whatever you like, and I'm in room 206. So I go up to the room and I'm pacing around in nervous anticipation. It's a knock on the door, and there stands Maria with a bottle of wine and a bottle of rum. And so she comes in, and we're sitting there having a drink and another drink, and so on and so on. And the window was open, and we're hearing all this sensual music from down below, and the mood was building. And at one point, she begins to get undressed. She's unbuttoning her shirt and getting undressed, and I guess my eyes got kind of big, and I'm looking around, and my mouth was open. I said, and she looked at me in a comical kind of way, and she said, are you surprised? I said, well, I wanted a bottle of rum, and I liked the company, and, but, and I was just kind of tongue-tied. And she says, well, you rented my services for the evening, and I'm here, and all the while she's continuing to get undressed. And she's beautiful. I'm at this point real awkward, and then she turns to me and she says, you've never been with a woman before like this? I said, no. She said, come here. She took me by the hand and led me, and I'm just gonna skip the rest of the story because, I'll leave the details to your imagination, but it was one of the most beautiful nights I ever had, and the memory is engraved in my mind, and there it is. Love with her, and then every time we come here I would see her. Of course, now I haven't seen her in well over half a century. I hope she's alive and well somewhere.
We hire a taxi driver to take us to the Hemingway House and mention that we'd love some Cuban coffee. Our driver, Gaspar, takes us to a local cafe where we get a chance to learn more about Havana from a local. Gaspar moved with his family from Baracoa in southern Cuba to Havana to be a taxi driver. The tourist industry has become the driving economy in Havana and is providing a good life for he and his family. Gaspar's thoughtful insights in the Cuban way of life are hopeful and encouraging. He and Finbar are quick friends, and we dub him our official tour guide for the remainder of the trip.
Now, I'm here in Cuba and I'm experiencing Cuba on the street and talking to people, and I have to say I'm pleasantly surprised because there is obviously a greater degree of freedom than what I had expected to see, and that makes me very happy.
There is a love that the Cuban people have for Ernest Papa Hemingway. His celebrity status is one of a small god. The Hemingway House is the most visited museum in all of Cuba. A monument to days of glory, the house is kept exactly as it was when Hemingway left it for the last time in 1960. A fighter and a lover, the public image Hemingway left us with reminds me much of Finbar. They are both what some may call the world's most interesting men, whose adventures have chased them around the world, and whose life on the water is the stuff of legend. Tourist guides fill in the details of the lives spent here, but the house itself seems quiet, as if it's waiting breathlessly for the owner to return. Above the buzz of the tourists at the main house, Hemingway's upper reading room and office looks out across Havana, all the way to the ocean. Here he could watch for clear days to take his beloved Pilar out for adventures on the sea. Hemingway would chase adventures in Pilar, like the shadows of Nazi subs in the waters off the coast. Finbar, however, met adventure with caution, knowing the cost if things went wrong. One of the adventures that chased him was the trip to Mariel in the 1980s. Mariel is a port where filming is not usually permitted, so I'd have to be on my guard.
Mariel. Boy, talking about Mariel kind of rattles my cage a little bit. So we're in Key West. I think it was April of 1980. All of a sudden, Fidel had decided that there was a lot of folks that wanted to get out of Cuba, and I guess he felt that those folks that wanted to leave were useless to him. So he decided to allow an exodus. The condition was that Cuban Americans could come get the people that they wanted to take out, and they had to come with a boat and take them that way. It must have been half the Cubans in Miami decided they were going to go on this adventure. Many of them came to Key West. I had not really intended to take part in this boat lift. My family was already out of Cuba, so I had nobody to go there to get out. But people came in and wanted to charter my boats to do this, and I was kind of scared to get in a position where I could lose my boat to the government. And so I decided my boats ain't going. Then one day, some folks come into my office, and they said, look, we have a situation and we need a captain. We chartered this big boat in Miami. It was an 85-foot overgrown sightseeing boat. They arrived in Key West, and the captain and crew got cold feet and they jumped off and disappeared. And at first I was very reluctant to do it. Then they bring in this old grandma, she must have been in her 80s, and she begins to plead with me. I have to go there to get my niños. It's my whole life. So finally I broke down and I said, yeah, I'll take you. We had 37 Cuban Americans aboard, and they wanted to bring back about 100 relatives. We get over there, and in the morning, there's countless boats milling around outside the entrance to Mariel Harbor. And there's Cuban gunboats, and they're running around kind of herding everybody. There must have been well over 1,000 boats anchored in Mariel Harbor. Big boats, little boats, all kind of boats. Shrimpers, fishing boats, yachts. And I never saw such a crowded harbor in my life. And we soon realized that all these boats were waiting to load, and some of them had been waiting for weeks. And we realized, because we had thought, well, you come in there, you get the people, and you leave, but that's not how it was. You got in there and you waited a turn. They would make announcements every couple of hours which boats to come to the dock and load. The name of our boat didn't come up day after day after day. The days got long and the tempers got short. Now we're there for 18 days. The supplies are running low and water was running low. Comes a boat alongside with 3 soldiers in it. They just came aboard without asking. One of my crew runs over and says, "Hey, what are you guys doing?" "Capitan, where is Capitan?" Crew came over and said, "We got visitors here." I got down to the deck, and the guy with the most stripes on his arm turned to me and he said, "You come, Colonel want to see you." I said, "Nah, I ain't going nowhere with you." He looks at me up and down, and he's, of course, he's wearing a piece on his belt, and he reaches down and he puts his hand on the piece. He didn't draw it, but he puts his hand on it. He says, "You will come with us." Well, obviously I have no choice. I told Bad Bob, one of my crew, I said, "You're in charge. I have to go with these guys. If I don't come back, you know what to do." Me, I'm shaking myself to pieces. I'm just trembling inside. I'm trying to be cool. I'm trying to look cool. Very difficult, because I am just really rattled, and I have reason to be. And this goes back to a whole nother story, but I didn't want anybody there in Mariel to know who I was in particular. I could be grabbed, and I thought that's what they were there for.
We arrive at Mariel Harbor and search for the right place to film Finbar by the water. While discussing the location, a local government informant approaches the car.
¿Cómo andan?
¿Cómo está? ¿Qué están filmando?
No, dando vuelta. No se puede.
No se puede, en esta área
Ya.
no se puede filmar.
Dice que aquí no se puede.
Concerned for the safety of our driver and ourselves, we leave that part of Mariel.
Wow.
A few miles down the road, we enter a residential section and find access to the water. I switch once again to filming with my phone.
And we go across the harbor, and there is a great big 100-foot yacht. And they come up alongside and take me aboard. So they open the door and I walk into this office, and there stands this guy, a tall, well-built, very dark and very good-looking man in an immaculate starched white uniform, and he's got a little swagger stick in his hand, and he's pacing around and he's slapping his swagger stick into his hand, and I can see he's clearly annoyed about something. And when I walked into the office, he put the stick down and he turned around and he smiled at me. "Siéntese, Capitan." And he motioned me over to a real comfortable chair. And he walked around and sat behind his desk across from me. And he began just small talk in Spanish. "¿Quieres café?" "Sí, por favor, señor." Then he takes and he opens a box of cigars and he offers me one. I take a cigar and I light it up, and he lights one up, and he and I are sitting there smoking cigars and drinking coffee. And he says, you see, life is good in Cuba. And I just replied without thinking. I said, well, I guess it depends who you are. And he frowned for just a moment, and then the smile came back and the small talk continued. And this went on for about 20 minutes. And then all of a sudden he gets a serious expression on his face. And he says, in perfect English, without a trace of an accent, he says, now, Captain, down to business. I said, oh shit. I don't know why he's been playing with me all this time, but this is it, the hammer is about to drop. And then he says to me, Captain, you have a big boat. I said, si, senor. He says, I need your big boat. I said, what do you mean you need my big boat? He says, well, I have certain people that we are sending out of here, and I need to put them on your boat. And I realize when he's talking about this that I am not there to be busted. He either doesn't know or doesn't care about the other stuff. And so I'm sitting there in a mixture of relief and frustration, not knowing what to do, what to say. I'm trying to change gears, and I guess I quit shaking. And I said, well, Colonel, these people chartered the boat, and, you know, I'm responsible to them. And he says to me, he says, well, Captain, you don't have much choice in this matter. And so at this point, I'm gathering my wits, and I'm not worried anymore. And I said, well, yes, I do have something to say about it. I'm the master of that vessel, and she will not leave except with whom I came for. And he looks at me and he stares at me for a while. And then very slowly, he reaches down and he pulls out his piece, a GI 45, and he lays it on the desk. The gesture is obvious. I don't know what the hell to do at this point, but I said, this son of a bitch wants to be dramatic. Well, I'll show him some drama. And so happens I was wearing a knife, a big knife. I had a fairly big Bowie knife on my belt, which, you know, sailors carry a knife. So I reached down, very slowly I reached down, I drew the knife and I laid it on the desk. And he looks at that, and he looks at me, and he says, suddenly he gets a big broad smile, and he says, very good, Captain, but no match. He said, tomorrow at 9 o'clock you will bring your vessel to the dock and we will load, with whom I say. So the next morning I bring the boat to the dock and they start loading people. Some of them are the people we came for. And then he starts loading other people, lots of other people. Well, this boat was actually certified to carry 99 passengers plus crew, but now we've got about 150 people on here, and they keep bringing them on. I said, hey, wait a minute, I can't carry more people than this. It's not safe. I don't have life jackets for them. That's enough. And this guy, he turns to me and he says, we'll tell you when it's enough. And they keep loading, and they keep loading, and they keep loading. And these people are on deck, and they're packed in like sardines, you know. We got 311 people on board. And I said to him, I said, no, stop, that's it. I am not taking another one. The guy says, you know, if we need to, we can take you off here, and we can put another captain on this boat. I said, well, that's what you're gonna have to do, because I ain't taking any more. So he kind of scratched his head and he looked around and he picks up his phone and he calls the colonel, the one that I had been with the day before. And they went off in a corner and they started talking. I didn't hear what they said, but he comes back and he's, okay, go. So now I got 311 people plus our crew. She's way, way, way overloaded. But that's what I got. So we go for Key West. It got a little rough. And that ship was rolling around like a pig. And those people were packed in so tight. And a lot of them began to get sick. But we got into Key West safely. And in the morning came our turn to come to the dock. And these people were getting off the boat, walking down that gangway, and each and every one of them would kneel down and kiss the ground. And finally, everybody's unloaded, and I was the last one off, and I did the same. I just bent over and kissed America.
I didn't understand what the term learning the ropes meant until I came aboard your ship. What have you loved most over the years?
Oh, I'd have to boil that down to various women and various ships. I have loved ships and I have loved women. Of course, it's different. Love of the ocean, well, it's being where I belong. It's doing what I belong doing. The satisfaction of being what I am. Just the satisfaction of it. That's the best thing.
Our adventure in Cuba was coming to a close, but we would soon return. I could only carry a limited supply of rum and cigars in my suitcase, and the habits formed here are not easily satisfied.
I am the Lord thy captain. There shall be no higher power aboard this ship. Thou shalt not disobey my order. Thou shalt not tell me bullshit. Thou shalt not lose thy cool. Thou shalt not take any strong drink or any strong drugs unless with my permission. Thou shalt not sleep on watch. Thou shalt not waste water. Thou shalt not hassle thy shipmate. Thou shalt not piss to windward, and thou shalt not bitch. So be it.
Aye, aye.
So be it? Very well.
This journey to Cuba was a great reminder of why I fell in love with sailing and of the lessons I learned from Finbar over the years. I try now to live in the present, not knowing when I'll be back this way again. I leave this moment with a renewed satisfaction of who and what I am, and I owe it all to two things: the old man and the sea.